Why are more and more men over the age of 45 choosing to live alone and still feel happy? It's not because they're incapable of love, nor because they don't have the opportunity to be in a relationship. On the contrary, they have loved, have been in long-term relationships, and have even sacrificed a lot for their families. But after all, they choose to live alone, proactively, without pressure, without struggle, without needing to prove anything to anyone. They wake up every morning with no alarm clock forcing them. No more rushed mornings trying to please someone else. They walk into the familiar kitchen, make themselves a cup of coffee, open the window to welcome the morning sunlight, and feel the quietness like a well-deserved reward after years of hustle and hardship. Today's video is a gentle conversation among seasoned men, those who have lived long enough to understand that happiness doesn't come from having someone by your side, but from appreciating time, space, and oneself. We'll take a look at 17 reasons why a man over the age of 45 can feel joyful, comfortable, and at peace living alone. This is not advice to stay single, nor an anti-marriage stance, but simply an honest, respectful, and realistic perspective on their choice. Let's begin with the first reason, a reason you might have felt. On a very quiet morning, a man entering middle age has often passed through the most hectic stages of his life. Work used to be the center. Family used to be the priority. And obligations were once unavoidable. But then one day, everything settles down. The children leave home. Work is no longer a constant worry. And he no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. That's when freedom appears, not loud, not dramatic, but quietly, like the morning sunlight slipping through the window. No one asks anymore, "Where are you going? When will you be back? Why did you spend like that? Why didn't you say something earlier?" Those questions once made him feel like he always had to explain, always had to justify. But now, every small decision, what to eat, where to go, or simply what time to wake up, is entirely his own. No one agrees. No one objects. Everything simply follows his own rhythm, a rhythm he never dared to live by before. The daily schedule of a single man over 45 might be waking up at 8, brewing a strong cup of coffee, turning on an old jazz record, then spending the morning reading, fixing up an old car in the garage, or biking down quiet roads. He no longer has to consider whether that time suits anyone else. Each day is a program he directs himself, with no script written by someone else. His living space is also different. That small house might be tidy, might be messy, might be silent or filled with music. But what matters is, there's no longer any need to compromise with someone about how to live in the place he calls home. He can place his desk by the window, hang old photos on the wall, leave the light on all night to read, or choose complete silence. No one says it's right or wrong. It's an absolutely safe space where he gets to be fully himself, when he no longer has to raise children or share finances with anyone else. The single man also manages his spending better. He can save more or spend on things that make him feel alive. Maybe a cooking class, a woodworking kit, a camera, or a 1-month road trip. He doesn't have to worry whether it's reasonable in someone else's eyes. Financial freedom sometimes isn't about wealth, but about having full autonomy. Imagine a man living in an RV, a mobile home. He might stop in a quiet forest in Oregon, then a few weeks later appear on a beach in California, then move on to a mountain town in Colorado. No fixed schedule, no attachments. It's not running away from life, but rather reconnecting with the deepest parts of himself and with nature. Freedom also comes from no longer being affected by someone else's emotions. He no longer lives in a state of always having to please someone. No longer has to decode the complexities of relationship dynamics. When living alone, emotions become clearer. He laughs when happy, rests when tired, sits in silence when sad. No need to explain. No need to hold back. That quietness is what makes many men feel truly alive after years of playing a role. Freedom isn't something you can see right away, but when you step into a room arranged just the way you like, when you set off on a journey without needing anyone's permission, when you buy a ticket without thinking about two people, when you feel at peace with solitude no longer being a burden, then you understand why people call it true freedom. Freedom is precious, but what else is going on inside the mind of a happy single man? We'll continue to explore. When a man passes the age of 45, his mind and emotions are no longer a reflection of his younger years. He's been through enough expectations, enough advice, and more than enough judgmental looks from society. There was a time in life when everyone around seemed to expect him to get married, to settle down, to live according to some predefined mold. But as time goes on, those molds begin to loosen, and he realizes no one else lives his life for him. The social pressure that once weighed heavily on his shoulders gradually loses its meaning. He stops worrying about what others think and no longer forces himself into standards that no longer suit who he truly is. Love, in his 20s, used to be a bright sky, full of hope. But after enough experiences, passionate dates, long-term relationships, a quiet breakup, or even a sudden divorce, he starts to realize that love isn't always what it looks like in books. The illusions fade, and the expectations grow more realistic. What comes instead is understanding and acceptance. He knows now that the right person may not always appear, and if they don't, that's okay. His experiences have made him calmer, more grounded, and most of all, no longer afraid of being alone like he once was. Over the years, he may have been hurt. A sudden breakup, the loss of someone close, relationships that drained him, left him lost. But it's during his time alone that he found space to heal. With the noise from outside fading away, he begins to hear what's happening inside. Each morning starts without rush. Each night allows for quiet hours of reflection. He doesn't run from the past. He doesn't judge it. He simply faces it as part of the journey. And in that silence, something within him slowly stitches itself back together. Emotional freedom opens up the perfect space for a man to return to himself. Some pick up reading again. Others learn a new skill, discover meditation or yoga for the first time, or simply learn to care for their mental well-being. With no distractions, no one imposing goals. Growth comes naturally. It's a kind of maturity that doesn't need to be declared, just practiced. Little by little, day by day, passions that were once pushed aside start coming back to life. He might spend hours in the garage working on an old car, go camping on weekends, strum the guitar in the late afternoon, or collect small items that remind him of his youth. No one asks why he's spending time on something pointless. No one stops him from diving into what he loves. And it's these small joys, quietly embraced, that make everyday life more meaningful. Relationships shift too. He no longer chases crowds or tries to prove himself through how many people he knows. Instead, he chooses meaningful connections, safe, respectful, mutual. He no longer seeks surface-level romance, but rather something deeper, something that understands. And if it doesn't come, that's fine, because sometimes a quiet evening with a glass of wine, a short call with an old friend, Those can mean more than any fleeting sweet words. He no longer feels the need to start over with someone new, not because he's afraid to love, but because he understands the emotional cost of building a relationship from scratch. The dates, the expectations, the introductions, the effort to understand someone else. They no longer hold the same pull. He knows what he needs. And if he doesn't find it, living alone is still a perfectly valid, peaceful choice. No pressure, no fear, no sense of missing out. None of this comes from avoidance. It comes from clarity and acceptance. A happy single man isn't someone who gave up on everything, but someone who chose to keep what truly matters to him. Slow down the frame. Let the background music fade. Leave a pause just long enough for the listener's feelings to settle. But what about the future? About aging? About the final stretch of life? Let's continue into the deepest part of this journey. When reaching a certain age, a man begins to think about the future in a quieter, more realistic way. No more drama. No more dreamy scenarios. He understands that he's walking through the later part of life, where each decision doesn't need to be loud but carries clear meaning. And one of those decisions is to accept and consciously prepare for living alone until the end. Not out of resignation, but with calmness. He reorganizes his home, lets go of unnecessary items, and chooses to keep only what holds emotional value. He learns to care for his health, not just with medicine, but through balanced habits, light exercise, and regular sleep, no longer expecting anyone to remind him, to cook a meal, or to care for him when he's sick. These things he does himself, not because he's lonely, but because he's grown. And more importantly, he no longer lives in fear of losing someone. Maybe he once did, but over time, he realizes that the only thing truly worth holding on to is himself, inner peace, simple daily joy, and the ability to live truthfully without compromise. When he's no longer afraid of losing others, he becomes freer, less hurt, and lighter in the way he lives. Actor Anthony Hopkins once said, "When you expect nothing from anyone, you're never disappointed. When you live fully with yourself, you are free." That quote feels like it was written for men who've made it halfway through life and found fullness in what once seemed like barren solitude. Happiness, at this stage, no longer lies in having someone next to him every morning. It lies in the feeling of waking up and not feeling lacking. A tidy room, a breakfast he made himself, a book halfway read, an afternoon sitting by the window, watching sunlight quietly slide across the wooden floor. These things are not loud, but they feel complete. They don't need to be given by someone. They don't need to be shared to hold meaning. They have meaning simply because he feels enough. People often confuse being single with being empty. But in truth, emptiness doesn't come from being alone. It comes from not knowing what to do with that time. For the experienced man, solitude is a chance to reconnect with himself, something he never had time for before. It's an empty space he chose. And because he chose it, it's not frightening. There are older men living in small houses in the woods, growing vegetables, reading books, talking to their pets. No social media, no dating, not much interaction. But they're not sad. They live with themselves fully and peacefully. They don't feel left behind. On the contrary, they feel like they've come home. Fade to black. The screen shifts slowly, leaving only the sound of wind rustling through the trees. White text appears unhurried. Happiness doesn't come from having someone next to you, but from living truthfully with yourself. Some people choose to be single because they want freedom, not to be bound by expectations or responsibilities. They want to wake up each morning the way they like, arrange their life to their own rhythm, from spontaneous trips to quiet evenings alone with a favorite book. That is freedom. Simple, but profound. Some choose to be single for emotional reasons. They've been hurt, lost trust, or simply haven't found someone who truly makes them feel safe. Instead of rushing, they take time to heal, to learn how to love themselves before loving someone else. And there are also those who, following a certain life philosophy, believe that happiness doesn't depend on whether or not they're in a relationship. They live slowly, live mindfully, and choose to stay with themselves like their closest friend. There is no one right way to live for everyone, but if you're single and feeling content, don't let anyone make you doubt that. Which reason speaks to you the most? Share it in the comments. And if you want to keep exploring, the next video will talk about how to live alone without feeling lonely after 50 scene of sunset. A man walks quietly through the forest, the last light of day stretching across each step. Gentle, warm music slowly rises. Thank you for staying until the end. Wishing you a life lived fully, whether with someone or with yourself.